We are and always will be a nation of immigrants.
This is my country, my damn country. Give me my country, you can keep the rest.
Bold men and women yearning for freedom and opportunity who leave their homelands and come to a new country to start their lives over.
We were strangers once too.
My country, my damn country. Give me my country.
Hello, 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 aliens and allies. Your friendly Russian is here. This is We the Aliens podcast. I'm your host, Sasha Kapustina. Thank you for tuning in. It's the first episode of the new year, and I have an amazing guest with an amazing story. This week on the podcast, my guest is a journalist, activist, and author, Asra Nomani. She's a former Wall Street Journal correspondent. She has written for the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time, People, Salon.com, and many, many other publications. She taught journalism at Georgetown University. You've heard her on NPR. You've seen her on CNN, on Fox News, and on Bill Maher's show, talking about Muslim extremism and Muslim reformism. Asra is the co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement. She was born in India and has had a distinguished career as a journalist. But her story is also deeply connected to a story of her dear friend and Wall Street Journal colleague, Daniel Pearl. Some of you may remember his name, and for some of you, like me, the story may be new, although the events unfolded 19 years ago. I lived in Russia at the time. They probably covered it in the news, but maybe I just wasn't as plugged in. So here's a little bit of context. Daniel Pearl was the South Asia Bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal. And in 2002, he was following a story that brought him to Pakistan, where he was kidnapped and then became the first Western journalist to be beheaded by Muslim extremists. I didn't know about this story at all, and so I was grateful for the opportunity to talk to Asra and hear her tell the story as a person who knew Daniel very well and who was there in Karachi with Daniel and his wife Marianne when this tragedy unfolded. It's a big and complicated story, so this week I'm doing 2 episodes. And so in this part 1, we focus on Asra's immigration journey and Daniel's role in her adaptation to American life. Here's part 1 of my conversation with Asra. I usually begin with 2 simple questions. Where did you come here from and when?
I arrived in the summer of 1969 from India. My brother and I, we were left behind, you could say, as my parents tried to settle in America just a couple years earlier.
Wow. And you traveled by yourselves?
Yeah, we were there by ourselves. They put us on an airplane. I had my brother as my taker of sorts, and then the flight attendant. So my grandmother put my brother and me in matching striped outfits that she had handmade, so that if we were separated somehow on the airplane, we would be matched back together again.
That's funny.
So we left her home in Hyderabad, India, and went to Bombay, India, got on a TWA flight to John F. Kennedy International Airport and arrived there to the loving embrace of my parents, whom I didn't recognize because I was just 4 years old. And that's why I wanted to so much talk to you, because I really love the way that you value this journey that so many people have made that is oftentimes unspoken.
Most of the times.
Yeah.
Immigrants don't talk about themselves. It's not common.
Yeah, we don't talk about the sort of invisible mark, right, of the journey. And it's so deep and so just impactful on your psychology that you can't even speak of it sometimes, I think. And And so my grandmother had to tell me that she was going to be on the next TWA flight coming over from India in order to get me on my flight. So as soon as I arrived, the name for paternal grandmother in India is your Dadi. So I said, "Where's Dadi?" And so so often immigration comes with that kind of subterfuge, I think, because you have to either fool yourself or you have to fool others or something. You have to do some self-talk because just pulling yourself out of your space and your safe place in this world is such a act of, you know, courage and fear that you have to have some kind of talk. And my grandmother had it for me, and so I arrived sort of waiting for her, but she never came.
Yeah. Wow, that's intense. It's
Yeah.
heartbreaking for a little kid.
Especially when you have immigration or trauma as a child. I was told by a psychologist that dissociation is sort of a natural response for survival. In dissociation, meaning that you just shut down certain emotions. And so things like, sadness or even depression, you don't even know anyway because you're just a little kid.
Yeah.
But then you learn to just be cute and loving and so that you can kind of survive again. And that's how dissociation can become like a learned behavior for a child too, going through those kind of transitions.
And you feel that that's what happened with you?
Yeah, I think it helped explain for me a lot of like sort of my own temperament in life. It becomes a gift also in moments of great stress or real panic, even where you can kind of dissociate and separate and not get sucked into the drama or emotion of a moment. And I think that informed like my life path, but definitely like as a kid, I think, yeah, you're doing two things. One is you're having to really manage these overwhelming emotions, like emotions that you don't even have words for, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then you're also having to observe this entire new reality around you and learn how to navigate it. And so I think you become this observer, like a third eye of sorts on your own life, and then uh, to just learn how to succeed and survive in the new society, and then also manage yourself emotionally. And yeah, I think that became part of my personality. It can be unhealthy when you suppress too much emotion, and then I think what I've always been told is that it can be healthy if we are able to somehow still recognize our emotions and our feelings.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. It's a tricky balance
Yeah.
of staying strong in the moment of stress, but not completely depriving yourself of an emotional reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you felt like you've also had navigated that?
Yeah. I don't think in my case it had to do with immigration because I moved to the US as an adult. But I think I had a similar experience of acquiring that quality
Yes.
of detachment or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of there's this concept in Buddhism, especially of non-attachment,
Hmm.
which is a more um, you know, non-judgmental idea that is more positive also, where you don't blunt, all of the emotions and the experiences that you're going through, but you're just not your ego and your entire self isn't swept up in it. And so I feel like that's that balance, once you kind of become aware of this experience happening within you, as I had to, I you go through different relationships with it also because sometimes it's in balance, sometimes it's not. Um, but back to like how it manifested itself for me is that you just end up, uh, for example, when I was just a little girl, uh, as a student at Martin Luther King Elementary School, trying to learn all about all these kids with names that I didn't even recognize from my own childhood back in India, like Ida and Heather and all these new names. Just trying to learn, like, how do you even become friends with another girl? How do you even uh, like make connections? And Christmas gift exchange was the big ritual when it was still allowed in elementary schools. And I remember my dad would always have me pack up a Barbie doll, and I would go to school with great pride. Um, and one year, one of the girls said, "Oh, not another Barbie doll," and I felt so embarrassed, right? Just because you don't, it's just such a little thing, but you're just like, "Oh man, I blew that one,"
Oh,
but my parents were so kind, and my dad promptly went to the McDonald's and got a gift certificate to bring in as my gift exchange, and but it's children too. Like, we don't know
yeah.
how to express the things that we feel, but even when there was this girl named Barbara, and she would always like jump on my shoulder to pretend to do leapfrog with me, um, with my body, basically, kind of like, I mean, I think in a way they would call it bullying today because it was constant and so harassing. And I had had that response that I had just learned to just not react,
Mm.
right? So but but it was really hurtful and annoying and a total pain for me to have this girl always, like, didn't know when she would kind of pounce on my shoulders. Um, and I just remember that because I know today now they, always uh, guide kids, speak up, express yourself, don't be a bystander, for example, be an upstander in bullying or in the things that you see. And I just remember that kind of experience because it did inform who I was later in very positive ways, because I just was not reactive to kind of craziness around me or harassment around me. And so I think that's a good positive attribute. But then the other is you just don't speak up for yourself, right?
Yeah.
You don't advocate for yourself. So I think that's sort of how that dissociation played out for me.
Interesting. I think I had a similar experience. And in Russian culture, it's, yeah, similar as it used to be, I guess, here. Like, parents wouldn't get involved in that as much. I mean, maybe now they do. I don't really know because I'm not there and I don't have kids. So, but I remember when I came and complained to my grandma about being not, I guess they would call it bullying. She said, just step away, just leave the situation.
Yeah, I think it was that's so interesting. And that's why I love conversations like this, because your childhood and mine are so different. I went to my mom for the advice, and she had the same response. And I
Mm,
think it's probably generational too, right?
yeah,
And probably in Russian culture too. Like, women aren't going to always respond by just fighting, or
definitely
right?
not.
And especially your grandmother's
Yeah.
generation, right? Because what years was she born? Because we have,
37.
yeah. So she's my mom's generation, exactly. And so my mom was born a decade later, but same dynamic, right? Like,
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
uh, nations apart, but that same generational dynamic, especially that women learned to step away. And it's good advice too, because
It can
as you
be.
and I know, yeah, it can be, exactly. It can be, but then it can also, it you don't get to self-advocate,
Yeah,
right?
when it's the
Yeah.
only way.
Yes. Yes. And that was their go-to,
Yeah.
right? And unfortunately, and my mom, like, she's my greatest champion now. So, and I'm sure, um, any woman from that generation is supportive of our voices today. But my mom would say, that was the only choice that they had.
Yeah, well, and it's odd because my grandma is very outspoken and very active, and
Oh, nice.
she
I love
really
that.
is she was a troublemaker in her
That's
own
so great.
way. Yeah, in Soviet Union where
Yeah.
it was not always,
Tell me something that she
without
did.
consequences. Well, one of the things that she did was in the late 80s, she quit the Communist Party.
Wow.
And
Wow.
not only she quit it, she wrote a letter. Like when you quit the party, you need to write a letter. And
Oh,
in Soviet Union, just to clarify for our listeners, basically most people joined the Communist Party because it was the only party. And if you wanted
yeah.
to advance in your career, you kind of had to join the party. For example,
Right.
my grandpa, my grandmother's husband, he didn't join the party. And because of that, he ended up never making a big career in science. He got stuck at the PhD level and never really, I mean, he did his research, he did everything, but he never became a big name or anything like that.
Yeah. He wasn't party endorsed.
Yeah. And
Right.
so, but grandma was a party member. One had to do that. So she joined. She was a reluctant, as most people, again, like you kind of were indoctrinated into it. It was not a choice really. And then in the late 80s, Soviet Union was shaky already. And then she quit the party. And when you joined the party, you wrote a letter to the party to join. I want to stand in the front lines of the builders of communism. And
Right.
as she was quitting, she was in her, I guess, 50s, and she wrote, "Due to my old age, I can no longer stand in the front lines of the builders of communism and ask you to relieve me of this duty."
Wow.
So,
Wow. Wow. Her old age.
yeah, yeah. Of course, it was like all just a big fu to that.
Yeah, basically. I love that story because it grounds us in who we are, right? And the courage that it took to challenge the status quo.
For sure. Yeah,
And here she is, the matriarch, right? Who told you to, walk away. And
yeah,
I guess, in a way, in a funny way, like that's exactly what she did, only she carried a big billboard with
yeah,
it.
yeah. For sure.
And
Well, she wouldn't, like, that's the thing. Like it's kind of like a division there. Like on a personal level, she would never engage in a quarrel,
interesting.
in a minor fight or anything like that. She'd be like, "Okay, bye."
Yeah.
But if it was something of principle, that's when
Yeah.
she would be principled.
Yeah. Yeah. When it mattered, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When it mattered for deeper values. And yeah, that really resonates with me too, because it really, you pick your battles basically. And probably for her too, like my mother, uh, you have limited time, you have limited resources, and I actually learned that lesson too from my mom, because not every battle's worth fighting, and that you have to pick the one that matters, right?
Yeah.
And take a stand. And then even when you take that stand, you don't make this long drawn out drama, but she basically laid down her letter and made it clear. And there was no years of battling and this and that, but she stood up for what she believes. That's really beautiful.
Yeah. I mean,
What's her name?
Larissa.
Oh, nice. What a beautiful name.
Yeah. Yeah, no, she's a rock star. She's still around and she's rocking.
Where is she?
She just returned from Israel back to Russia.
Oh, wow.
She moved there when she was 75, lived there
Wow.
for 7 years, and just moved back to Russia in the middle of the pandemic
Oh my gosh. That's
because, and it's, and again, grandma, uh, she wants to be closer to the cemetery.
oh,
Uh,
so
That's
sweet.
that's her.
Oh my gosh. The
Because
cemetery,
she was worried that if she were to die in Israel, it would be too difficult,
right.
to the extent of impossible, to potentially transfer her body back to
Right.
Russia so that she can be
Wow.
buried with grandpa. So she's
Oh
been
my
planning this for like
gosh.
5 years.
But that is so deep.
It is.
Have you had her on to talk about all this?
She doesn't speak English, but I'm glad that we
Oh,
get to talk about her a little bit. So
oh my
that's
gosh, yeah, because I just do too, because this is the story of all of us, this is your grandmother's story, is that she made that journey, and then that there is this thing that is unspoken so often, but it tugs at your heart, that connects you back to your roots and your home country. And it may express itself in action like it did for her, or it may not, but it's in your heart. And you can't, the the idea, that concept that we talked about, dissociation, like you can't uh, just compartmentalize it, because without dealing with it one way or the other. Because one of the uh, oh my gosh, like the one part of the story that I didn't say about my brother and me when we arrived back in, well, I say back in the US, but when we arrived in the US for the first time, was that my brother was just a couple years older, and he remembered my parents, right? And he had memory, and he knew exactly what was going on, that my grandmother was not going to be coming on that plane afterwards. So he was, I was 4, and then he was just about 7. And the moment he arrived in America, and I don't talk about it because the metaphor is so kind of like send you the wrong message, but I I know that you and your listeners will be able to understand it. When my brother arrived at JFK, he vomited, and that metaphor, like some people can be like, "What? That's because he arrived in America?" No, it wasn't that, right? It was because he'd made this profound journey and he knew it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I just share that now because just listening to your grandmother's story, like it reminds me, like your grandmother. So she's, how old is she now?
She's 80, turning 83 this year.
Wow. So she, in her 80s, right, had this pull. And despite all the rationalization, right, like of the new life and it's COVID, and there's all these reasons why she shouldn't go back, but she does. And for my brother, and I think it's like this for so many immigrants. And I wish I'd studied psychology because it's one of my passions, but they say that that break, right? That dissociation also is a break. And it can be unhealthy when it becomes like such a deep break that you're disconnected in your brain from any healthy processing of
Yeah.
experience or emotion. And then for a little kid, especially, like your brain's not even fully developed, right? Your
Yeah.
prefrontal is not developed, so you can't do rational thought. But for my brother, it caused a real break. And they say for immigrants, like it does, that there's a psychology that we don't even fully grasp or talk about now that happens for immigrants that kind of makes us at risk for all these psychological challenges like depression and anxiety. That, of course, is in all of society. But for my brother, it became a really deep and lifelong challenge then that it just reminds me, like the poor thing, like he worked so hard and uh, tried so much to uh, you know to feed and survive in this country, but he had this vulnerability in his mind because he was just genetics and the environment then, that when he became a teenager, he had the kind of big breaks in the brain that are now the words that we know are psychosis and serious depression. And in that, and we didn't know at the time what to do. uh, the pediatricians and the doctors said, "Oh, it's a teenager acting out and
Oh,
these
God.
things." But
Yeah.
he was passionate about soccer. He in America, he loved soccer before America discovered soccer.
Mm-hmm.
He knew Pele and Maradona, and he could tell you the history of the Soviet teams, the Russian, and then when they became Russian teams, like every national player, every appearance on on the global stage. Um, but when he was in his early 20s, then his dream was to play in the World Cup and to become a professional soccer player. And what he did, despite all like sort of logic, did a journey back to India
Mm.
for to play for the uh, Bengal, something or the other. I wish I knew all the team names, but follow his dream to be in India, his birthplace, to become a soccer star there. And that's where his sickness then by that time got even more profound.
Oh,
And then he became really sick with various diagnoses over the years, from including bipolar disorder. And I don't talk about it a lot because it's his story,
yeah.
but he's, a symbol of courage for me, because he's that boy in the striped outfit matching my striped dress that brought me over to this country, and had this challenge inside of his mind that manifested in ways that, really robbed him, of his full potential. But a really wise person told me, with immigration, like when we came as immigrants, uh, there is a death that happens.
Yeah, it's interesting because I always say that immigration is like reincarnation without having to physically die.
That's beautiful. That's really true. And like reincarnation, you have this memory, right? That's on your soul. There's this concept in Hinduism where they talk about bandhas. And sometimes, like if people take yoga, they'll sort of hear your yoga teacher talk about your bandha. So, this is a word of the day for the listeners.
Yeah.
Bandh means a knot.
Mhm.
And they say in reincarnation that you sometimes have knots that connect you to your past life or relationship in a past life that then gets manifested again in your new life. And one of the goals that they say in your current life is to unknot these
Mm.
troublesome connections that you may have. Otherwise, it will carry with you into the next life. And so I think that you're so right, because that's what captures immigration, that we
Yeah.
have these
Yeah.
knots.
Yeah. Um, may I ask, where's your brother?
Yeah, so my brother, any minute now, he could ignore the closed door and hop down the stairs. Yeah, I'm talking to you now from my mother's house. So I'm living in Morgantown, West Virginia during the uh, COVID-19 challenge that we've got. I normally live in Northern Virginia, and I came back home as soon as I could with my son, who live together with my parents and my niece and my nephew. And then my brother lives just down the road. He has his own apartment, and he comes every day to my mom's house to have her great cooking. And he has a job where he works at a local restaurant and is now in his 50s. And the thing about him that I admire so much is, and I think this is survival too. This is his survival, is he still dreams of becoming a soccer star. Like, and he tells me, "Oh, do you know, for the Peruvian national team, they had a player that was in his 40s, and the and the and the Bolivian team has a player in his 50s." And it's been one of my unrealized dreams. You know how, like, they have these Make-A-Wish
Mhm.
foundations, right?
Yeah.
I've just wanted to take all the resources that I have in the world and let him, and just realize something of that dream that he had in some way. And I imagine sometimes things like a podcast where he gets, because he's a savant, right, about soccer. And I imagine a podcast where he can just interview people and just geek out, like
About soccer?
football. Yeah,
Oh,
about
yeah.
soccer, yeah, geek out with all the millions of billions of people who love soccer in the world. But he's gone through his ups and downs. He was married for a bit, and that's, my niece and nephew are from that marriage, and that marriage didn't survive, but we have beautiful kids from that marriage. And he's this editor that I had one time. He told me, when one time when my brother got sick, and I was just devastated. I was in my 20s, and the thing that people who have experienced it themselves or have loved one that has experienced psychosis know that it's a break, right? And it's literally a break in your mind,
Yeah.
but it's like a death. And each time he would get sick, it was like my brother died again and again and again, but was still alive before me. And I think sometimes, to your point, like about the reincarnation, like that is what happens. Like each time you make a move, and it could be move from one city in the U.S. to another, because it's migration too of sorts, within the same country, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it could be, I think like if we were to take that metaphor, it's so true. Like whether you leave one job and go to another, leave a relationship and go to another, like it's a journey each time. And like we have to really take care of ourselves and kind of check in mindfully about like what's going on for you, right? Like what's check in with your body, check in with your thoughts, and be really self-aware so that we can process it fully, right, in our brain.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because it's it's really interesting what you're telling me all of this, because usually people who come at a younger age don't have such vivid memories, and maybe they do have all that trauma stored, probably most likely, but they don't connect to it in the way you are describing.
Yeah.
And because of that, I have always thought many times, because I came here as an adult and I came with no intention of staying. I did not come to immigrate. I
Okay.
came for graduate school and I had zero intention of staying. I was planning to go back, and then life happened and I ended up staying. And so for me, it was kind of a process of 5 years later, I was already living here, working, paying taxes. And I was like, oh, I'm an immigrant. Uh,
Wow.
it was like a whole different thing, and that's when my process of realizing what the hell's going on started. So
Right.
I'm like
But
5 years
started
behind.
started consciously
Yes.
because yes, because
Yeah.
that's what, even though you were an adult, like I would say that even in that process, but even as an adult, how old were you in your
I was 25 when I
yeah,
got
you're
here.
still so young, and even then, the brain, your brain isn't even fully developed. Like it's just about fully developed for a woman at that point. But even there, like you had many years of unconscious processing while you were making a journey that you didn't even know you were making.
Yeah. But the fact that it was unrealized, I always felt that it kind of uh set me back a bit, because
Yeah.
I wasn't conscious,
Right.
and I was
Right.
not I was disconnected from the reality.
Yeah, yeah, and in
Uh
a way, see, that's where and that's where I do believe it's funny because I keep, I keep referencing, yeah, Buddhism and Hinduism. I'm Muslim, by by religion, but I believe all these religions and philosophies, really their philosophies offer us something. But in Buddhism, there's also this concept of like radical acceptance that I had to really hear that and take it, because even when we live dissociated or disconnected, like we have to even accept that that was what we did, and to survive.
yes.
That's, because that's, you probably, I mean, you couldn't even manage even in your 20s. Like you had to learn the academic system, you had to learn just all of our funky bureaucracies in America
Oh
too,
yeah.
to survive. So managing all this other emotional stuff was just probably beyond even your time and your emotional capacity, even maybe. You
Probably.
your
Yeah,
mind could manage it. Your mind could acknowledge it when you were ready and had this space, maybe even.
probably. Yeah, probably. It's all a process, and it's interesting how everyone goes through it. And the thing is that because I came here as an adult, and I thought that, it's hard not to look at things that could have been different if I came at a younger age. And I always thought, oh, I wish um my dad did come here when he was younger, because he didn't. and
Yeah.
he had an opportunity. And then I kept thinking, oh, well, how my life would have been different if he left then, if we came here and I was 7 or 9, and how I would have gone to high school here and to a different college and all those things. And you're telling me this, it's very interesting to hear how I always think, like, what's the best age to move? And
Yeah.
really there's no answer to that.
I understand the what ifs in life. Like, man, I went through so many decades thinking that, but I finally did come to realize that, like, I mean, the reality that you know now is one that would have been completely different, of course, if other choices had been made, but they could have ended up very differently, right? Like they could have
Yeah.
ended up with a car accident that
Yeah.
claimed his life
Yeah.
2 years after he arrived. Do you know what I mean? There's just, you don't know what it would have meant if different decisions had been made. And so there's no, I always think about worst case scenario in order to talk myself out of the what ifs of life, especially in love, because especially when you have children, you finally say, it's only because of all of my messed up decisions that I was able to come to this moment when I was able to create this life that is now before me. So parenthood becomes like a really great, like, wake up to, like, stop having regrets in life and stop having the what ifs. But I think there is no perfect age, but there's a better process. There's a better. I, this is what I encourage everyone to just always think about, not only in the issues of immigration, but in life, that we have a lot of control over the health of our brains and how we process whatever we're going through. Immigration is one of those things, but immigration is just like a metaphor, like we talked about, for journeys of
Yeah.
so many kinds. And we have the capacity to do that journey in a more healthy way, than an alternative that would be less healthy, right? Like we can be um, angry or stay stuck in grievance uh, or or depression or dissociation. Like there's so many different ways, but that we can process any experience in our life. And the one takeaway that I've had in my life is that we just have to try to do whatever we do in life, like in the most healthy way for our brains that we possibly can. And there's science about it now. There's professional help. Um, there's great podcasts. Like even this one is not about psychology, but it's about expression, right? So this
Yes.
is where you get to have narrative therapy almost.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
and talking about it and being
yeah,
open about it. And I'm
yeah,
very, I think I did not expect, us to go into that and so deep, but
yeah.
I'm really happy that we did.
Yeah, I didn't either, and I think it's just most people are going to be just listening to us, but I think we're connected over Zoom as we're talking, and I think just being able to see you and see your warmth and engagement and your sincerity is what drew me to, like, tell you these deep stories that I haven't talked about myself, because they're so, when you think about it, like, we live them, they define us. They're so raw, really, and they're so profound. And now here I am, sharing it with you, but it's because I feel like I can, and I it's kind of funny because all it took for me to kind of tap that was go back in my memory to that simple question you just asked me. It was just like that one question, like, when did you arrive here? And where did you arrive? And in there was this experience with my brother, right? And then from that moment came this lifetime of both, challenge and processing and learning, that we're still on today.
Yeah. I really appreciate you going there with me so boldly. I know that many people will recognize themselves or their loved ones in parts of these stories. And I do want to move forward to a different part of your story, I'd like to talk about your friendship with Danielle Pearl. Going all the way back, how did you meet Danny and what was your relationship?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I smile when I answer the question because I met him in the 1990s. It was 1993 that I arrived at the Washington, D.C. bureau of the Wall Street Journal, and Danny arrived there also. You
Which
know,
I know for you was a huge, huge achievement and a huge thing coming from being in English as second language
yeah,
kid.
yeah.
Can
You
you tell me a
know,
little bit about that?
yeah, sure. I as a child immigrant to this country, Um, I think sometimes this editor friend of mine helped make sense of this for me also. He said that another thing that we do as immigrants sometimes is learn to shut off like the overwhelming emotions that we experience because we've made a journey and we need to succeed. And so you can't allow anything to get in the way, including your own emotions. And so I was the overachieving immigrant kid. I was the kid who was going to make sure that our immigration was a success. And so I got the straight A's. I, made sure in ninth grade when we had an award for the highest GPA, I made sure that I would be able to get that prize. And and so my path became journalism in order to understand the country around me and have an excuse to talk to people.
Hmm.
So I
I
ended
can
up,
relate to that.
yeah, exactly. It gets you out of your own separation, and it gave me a foot then in American society. But then in the 1990s, I was still struggling with this concept that they call assimilation. I was
Hmm.
in my, late 20s by then, and I had just come out of a failed marriage that lasted just a little bit longer than Kim Kardashian's first marriage. Um, I had left a man that I had fallen in love with that was here in America, a white American Lutheran, who was everything that I wasn't supposed to marry according to the rules of like my conservative Muslim background. And so I arranged my own marriage with love, we called it, an arranged love marriage with a guy that checked the box. He was Pakistani, he was Muslim, and it was a complete mismatch. But I journeyed to Pakistan for this traditional marriage and forced myself into this identity that wasn't me because I thought that's what I should do. And through some very good therapy sessions, learned that uh, we should do what we want to do, not what we should do. And every time we start a sentence that says "I should do this" or "I should do that," we have to just really think about it.
Yeah, really check
Um,
it.
yeah, and really check it. And so,
I'm sorry, I read one of your articles about this marriage and I was fascinated because back in Russia, I studied law. And as one of the things that we studied that was fascinating to me was the way a divorce happens in a Muslim marriage. I was then fascinated and I couldn't believe it that that's how it is. And then I read your article and you actually described that happening to you. And I was like, oh my God, this
it's
is
true.
indeed real.
Yeah, it's shocking, and it's something that I and other women activists and male feminists too fight. But there's this concept in Islam that you have your religious marriage, right? And so in that religious domain, what we've been told is that a man can divorce his wife by just saying one word 3 times, talaq, talaq, talaq. And that means I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. And it's so effing ridiculous because it's humiliating, it's disempowering, it's imbalanced in terms of power in the relationship. And it's just also it can be impulsive. And so
And wasn't it
uh,
also in writing in your case?
Yeah. So in my case, so I was married in Pakistan, in this religious marriage. And so one day, to my shock, after our marriage fell apart, I get a piece of mail at the Wall Street Journal office of all things, because the man that I married sent it to my office. And that piece of paper was the divorce decree. And it was literally in writing there then, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. And I was just like, this is ridiculous, And it was really in moments like that I became a Muslim feminist, because it sounds like an oxymoron, but it's just like every um, woman, and I want to say men too, because we got our male allies who have challenged orthodoxy, that there was a time when the idea of Jewish reform didn't exist, right? That the idea of women ministers didn't exist. So it required feminism within faiths to make that happen. And I just decided for myself that, like, Islam was too much a part of my DNA and my being, that I was going to just walk away from it without challenging these interpretations like this. And I divorced you 3 times issue has become, it's interesting that you studied it in law school, because it's family law,
Hmm.
and in it is inequity, inequality, it's injustice, and it expresses itself in many other ways, like, the settlement, the alimony, the child custody, property rights, like that same kind of injustice
Well,
expresses
what we
itself.
were explained, and correct me if that is not fully correct, um, that once the man says that, a woman has to leave with whatever she has on her. In some cultures, women try to wear as much jewelry as they can at any given time because they don't know when that moment might arrive.
Oh my gosh, I know. You're just reminding me of these absurdities, like these injustices that, yes, exist, and that does happen. And it's um again, interpretation, right? So it's like law is and religion is, really, in my eyes, it's how we interpret it. And so that is the interpretation that too many of our Muslim societies have adopted. And so that is, in fact, it's just chilling to me, because that relationship of women to jewelry in our traditional societies is wrapped up in that kind of injustice, because that's where her property right lies. That is literally what she can, quote, walk away with,
And that's
right?
what it's limited to.
Yeah, yeah. And now, just to give your listeners some hope, is that there are women's groups and human rights groups that are challenging those kind of interpretations. So that, for example, in my native India, they have Muslim women have taken to court the fact that this "I divorce you 3 times," let's just say talaq to the third power, right, is unjust. They've taken that to court, and it's been thrown out of court, because it started becoming insanely stupid. Like, it became so uh, bad that men would literally then text that to their wives to divorce them, and that would become accepted. Yeah,
Is there an
and
emoji for that? Ugh.
yes, exactly. The broken heart emoji, right? You're
I'm
laughing, and
laughing,
you're,
but it's
I
horrible.
know, I know. And so, and bringing up emojis, like that's when religion is twisted, right? I once did a list of the most ridiculous fatwas, which is a religious ruling in Islam that have been issued. I borrowed from Steve Colbert. I called it the ridiculous, right, of
Hmm.
bad fatwas. And one of them said, like, you can't use the devil emoji because it's like invoking Satan in your language and in your words. And I was just like, you guys have lost it. Like, you've so lost the narrative about what religion is supposed to be about. But I had literally gotten that piece of paper just that spring that Danny then arrived at the Wall Street Journal bureau. And I was just engulfed with this paradox, right? And this confrontation with my traditional culture. And I had within me unreconciled issues of migration, and identity. that I hadn't been able to fuse. And that's why like this issue of like living a life where you are able to integrate yourself in a healthy way is so deep and profound to me because that spring I had my break. My response then was deep depression. I went every day to a therapist, and that's when that therapist was able to help me process the immigration that I'd made as a child. Because at that time, then my niece from my brother, she was just a 2 at the time,
Mm.
and when I heard her cry for her mother, it was like a knife in my stomach because I realized what a 2-year-old feels. And I suddenly, through love of my niece, could see myself in a way that I couldn't even remember, right? Because I was so young.
Hmm.
I'm just explaining all this because, man, I was a head case, right? That spring when
Yeah.
this new, energetic, bright-eyed guy showed up in the newsroom in the DC bureau.
And so, how did you become friends?
So we just became friends, and because we both love journalism, and we were both there, at the highest levels of journalism, and we most of the other reporters in the bureau were young parents,
Hmm.
and so we didn't have a lot of single reporters to hang out with, and so what happened is that Danny arrived in the bureau just at a time when my psychologist, in these many sessions that I was having, was advising me, do what you want to do, not what you should do. And she gave me this advice too, is learn to play. Because as a little girl, I had learned to survive, right? And to work hard to make sure that this life in America would be a success for our family.
Hmm.
And so she said, nurture that little girl within yourself and play. And so Danny worked hard and played hard. And so all of a sudden, this geeky girl who didn't ever hang out with anybody after school or on Friday nights or Saturday nights, because
Well, especially boys. I can
yeah,
imagine
especially
coming
boys. Oh
from
my
a
gosh.
Muslim
Yeah. Yeah.
background.
I all of a sudden the cool kid was like inviting me to hang out. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what do I do with like, okay. And so I would go after work for happy hour, which of course this conservative Muslim girl like never even knew what that concept was. But Danny's like, have you ever had beer? I'm like, yeah, well, I once had this like Guinness. And he's like, oh, terrible start. Don't this so he at this place called the Big Hunt. I had my first taste of beer. It was wheat beer. He's like, that girls like wheat beer.
True.
Yeah, I know exactly. So I had my first taste of beer and I liked it. And so I, learned that this great elixir, right? That is having a drink with your friends. Removed inhibitions about socializing that I just didn't know how you hang out with folks. And then Danny was played the violin, and he would go to this thing called open mic nights. And I'm like, what's an open mic night?
What did he play at the open mic? What kind of music? Like, would he come up and play like a classical piece on an open mic night?
No. He was so hip. So he would do bluegrass.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and he was so good at it that he could do those open mics with other people.
Oh,
So they would have
jams.
jams. See,
Oh,
I don't
wow.
even know the words. He'd be like, oh my God, Asra, you're such an embarrassment. But that's what he did for me is though I was by then 27 and lived, an adult life in America now, I hadn't immersed, right? I hadn't known American culture because I had been separated myself.
And it's so lucky and such a fortune to have someone like that to guide you into a culture.
Yeah, that's what's like connected me with him and what made me so grateful to him, because I felt like he showed me graciousness, like as a person. And I know for him, and he's such a good guy, like it was just, oh, I thought you were cool and you're interesting. And but he could see me. That's the thing, is that he could see the fullness of who I was as and yet not not just wrapped up in the identity politics that we so mark people by today, but as this person who just didn't know music or hadn't had beer. It wasn't about my religion or about my culture. Like we never talked about these markers of identity, but
Mm.
he knew me fully. And my favorite memory is that I confessed to him one time that well, he said, like, "Who'd you go to the prom with?" I'm like, "Prom? Like, nah, I wasn't allowed to go to the prom." And he's like, "Oh, we have to fix that." So so literally as I turned 28 then and that summer, and I threw my first party. At 28, I threw my first party, and we called it a Midsummer Night's Prom. And and all the women, including myself, wore old bridesmaids dresses that we never thought we'd wear again. And the men wore tuxedos and with cummerbunds. And I ordered a keg. Like I never had a keg party. Oh my gosh. And the cops came. It was like a
Oh,
huge success. Huge
yes.
success. It was so
100%.
great. And talking to you, I think helps me also process, because I can't sometimes explain to people fully, like just the depth of that friendship and what it meant to me, and why it so defined my life then, and my like commitment to like always find justice for Danny, because he gave me these gifts. Now that I think back on it and I think about like the marching orders I got right from my psychologist was to play and to um, nurture your younger self. Like he was that kid, when you're growing up, that's on your block that you just hang out with, right? That
Mhm.
like you go climb trees with, that go to the ice cream man when he comes around the block, just like those really pure experiences of childhood that make you full.
Can we jump a bit forward? Tell me what brought you to Karachi in late 2001? It was already right after 9/11.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so that part of the world was already tricky destination.
Oh, yeah. It was, typical response that journalists have. The State Department was telling everybody not to go to Pakistan, so we're all working our butts off to get to Pakistan. Um,
Yeah.
and and so Danny was working in the Bombay. He'd set an office for the Wall Street Journal in India, and he was there with his Marianne. And so he got on a plane from India and landed in
And what
Pakistan.
brought you there?
And then me, I said, I really want to do reporting in Pakistan too. And he kept telling me, yes, you have to come. Like we need you in order to translate so much of this uh, dynamic. Because being Muslim and being from that part of the world, I knew so much of the dynamic of extremism, especially that had manifested with the 9/11 attacks. So I was on book leave, and I got an assignment then from Salon magazine to go there and do reporting, including first person narrative about the new reality in Pakistan and the war that was about to happen in Afghanistan. So I got on a plane, and it was deep for me too, because the last time I'd gotten on a plane to go to Pakistan was for this marriage that had, you know, literally evaporated within months. And so it was it was tough that way, to return. One another story that I thought was another experience that I had in Pakistan that I thought was like a metaphor for my relationship with my religion, and also just the traditional society, was that a tradition in weddings is that when you're leaving now as a new bride with your groom, family put the Quran over your head so that you're like leaving under the like protection of religion and God. And my grandmother that I had left behind in India was now living in Pakistan, and she was at my wedding, and she was holding the Quran with my father, and it literally fell on my head. So they had to like scramble to pick it up again, and
It cannot get better.
yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, where am I not getting the hint here? So I really tried to lean in, as the metaphor is now, to my true self and my values and beliefs. So I started playing beach volleyball. I loved volleyball. And one of the fun things that Danny and I did was we played sand volleyball behind the Lincoln Memorial. And I would wear shorts, which was something that wasn't acceptable in my traditional Muslim culture. And I would even wear swimsuit. I started dating, which I really hadn't done. I dated since I was a teen, breaking all rules, but I started dating openly, introducing boyfriends to my parents, just trying to integrate, right? Like instead of living dissociated, and people who are like in the closet about anything understand the tax that can have on your being. So I got on a plane after the 9/11 attacks, trying to integrate. But Danny still had a sense of humor in the midst of this, horror of the 9/11 attacks. And he wrote to me and he's like, I know there's a war going on, but can I still look for a husband for you? So he was always also trying to help,
Yeah.
me like find love and integrate all that into my life too. But I landed there to do this reporting on the Islamic extremism and the ideology that led to the 9/11 attacks.
Mhm.
And that's part of the assignment that I had when I got there.
And so you did meet someone there.
Yes, I did. I met someone because I hadn't learned my lesson about, finding love that's mismatched. And, as a girl growing up in the 70s, there was this patch that I had on my jeans that said "Make love, not war." So I
Yes.
took it literally. Fell in love with this young man who I thought I was going to marry, because again, I still had that traditionalist, path, and dated to marry, which is also not very smart always.
Nothing wrong
Ever.
with that.
Okay, all right, good. It's just that you have to choose wisely, though,
Right.
and not. That's the thing, is that I agree that I believe in I still believe in kind of traditional ideas like that, but you have to break up quickly if it's clearly not a good match for you. And sometimes just in our generation of we don't have a handbook, and as Muslim women, especially on dating, because my mom was in an arranged marriage, and so many of us didn't grow up dating as teens when you're kind of learning the lay of the land. So so I would always just stay in relationships longer than I should have, because I thought, oh, okay, now I've kissed this man, so I must marry him. Um,
Sorry.
right? That's not sensible, right?
That doesn't, yeah, no.
Yeah.
Not exactly how it works
Yeah,
in this
exactly.
world.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like it sounds so naive and innocent
It
because, but
totally
that's
I just thought about how that's how I'm sure you will understand it, right? That's how I thought when I was 12.
exactly, but that's where we are developmentally, because we didn't date when we were 12. So
Yeah.
at 37, that's still how I was. But you're so right, actually, because by you sharing that with me, like it confirms something that I didn't really know, because as a 12-year-old, I didn't get the guy, right? So I didn't know, like, oh, now I think I'm going to marry him. But that's what we think, even at 37. And that's what I thought. And definitely like got every signal that this was not a good match. And 19 years ago, was thinking, okay, this is going to be the love of my life, um, and and got this house in Karachi to write my great American novel in Pakistan.
it for today. Tune in on Thursday for part 2 of my conversation with Asra, where she tells how Danielle's kidnapping and murder changed her life and changed the world. I hope you enjoyed this part of the conversation, and let us know what you think. Shoot us a message on social media, or you can call our Google Voice and leave us a message, or email. I'll put the information in the show notes. And don't forget to share the show with a friend, someone who came from India, or someone who grew up Muslim in post 9/11 America, or someone who's interested in journalism, or someone who can't make sense of dating in America, or someone who you haven't talked to in a bit. Just shoot them a text with a link to the show and let them know you're thinking about them and help us grow the show. And remember, we're here to stay. We'll find our way. Thank you for listening. Have a great week. Stay safe. Tune in on Thursday. Love y'all. Peace.
My country, you can keep the rest. This is my country, my damn country, and it don't mean a thing.